Welcome to the Sherry Welsh Coaching Podcast. This is Phil Johnson, and joining me today is leadership coach and author Sherry Welsh of sherrywelsh.com. Sherry coaches individuals and also works with groups within companies. And you can get a copy of her book, which is called Slowing Down: Unexpected Ways to Thrive as a Female Leader, from any of the major book retailers. Sherry, thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Phil. It's great to be here.
Now, Sherry, in our last podcast, we started a conversation that we'd like to continue today, talking about expectations versus agreements, or co-creating strong agreements, as you like to say. And the gist of that was that oftentimes a frustration or some confusion or a misunderstanding in our life, whether it be at home or at work, can be an indication that we're operating based on expectations or assumptions of how people should be behaving, rather than by clear, co-created agreements. And we talked about how we can turn that around, starting by making a clear, specific request for what we want, and then involving the other party in forging an agreement that is not one-sided, but is co-created. And mainly we talked about that in the personal realm. And you had that great illustration about coming home late at night from a business trip with your driveway snowed under, and you thought, why didn't my son shovel the driveway? And you realized, I never asked him. And that was a great example in the personal realm. And today, we'd like to get into how does this work in the office? So I wonder, to begin today, maybe if you could talk a bit about where do we see expectations at the office? How does that whole area of expectations and assumptions come into play in the professional realm?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the different clients I'm working with, 9 times out of 10, they have a misunderstanding going on, either with a colleague at work, potentially with another group in another part of the company, and many times at home. So we've covered the home base as far as misunderstandings and expectations and assumptions being made that can be converted into clear co-created agreements. And as you were talking in the introduction, what I wanted to mention is, you don't need to create an agreement for everything. It's only for things that aren't working the way you'd like them to work. So it's only for those areas where you've gotten into a situation where you're frustrated, or you're feeling stuck, or you're feeling limited in some way. Mm-hmm. And that's when you want to say, all right, what's going on here? What is it that I want? And how do I, who do I want to ask? And what specifically do I want to ask them for? And then that's how the co-created agreement gets started, converting a complaint that you have about someone or something into a clear request. So in the office environment or in the business realm, what happens is, with many of the clients I'm working with, they're really frustrated because a colleague or a person in another group has not done their part of the deal, of the task, of the job, of the project, whatever it might be. And they're feeling kind of helpless, which is our level 1 victim energy. So when you're feeling helpless, you shut down, you go into, okay, there's nothing I can do, I got to wait for them. So now the anxiety is starting to build, and potentially moving into level 2, getting frustrated. You're starting to get a little bit resentful that people aren't working as hard as you are, or aren't keeping their commitments like you're keeping. So now the judgment's kicking in.
Yeah.
And so what's happening is you're spinning in your head, and you're getting more worked up about a situation, and you're not taking the action to rectify it. And that's where you convert then into a clear request. What is it that I want from this person specifically that I'm not getting? Mm-hmm. So that I can continue moving forward. I can continue moving towards the goals and objectives that I've agreed to, and making a difference in this company. I spend a lot of time at this company. I want it to be worth something. I want to make a difference, and that's why I'm here. So that's the conversation you can have with yourself that starts to shift into then a clear co-created agreement. We always say co-created because if it's just a quote-unquote agreement, we talked about that last time, it could be an expectation just dressed up to be called an agreement.
Yes.
Right? And that's not going to get you very far. It's going to even actually build even more resentment and frustration. So the co-created comes when it truly is a situation that's not working. And, you've talked about it, you haven't made progress, it's just continuing month after month, it's not working. The person consistently is late in information or doing their part of the job. And so you gotta slow it down to really say, okay, what is it I want to ask for specifically? And I say that, I emphasize that word specifically all the time when I'm working with clients.
Yeah.
Because, when it's a vague request, the other person doesn't know what to do with that. So they typically just say yes to be agreeable. Yeah, okay, yeah, I can do that. Even though they don't know what specifically it was that you asked for. So now you're in trouble because you're thinking you have an agreement that's co-created. And in the end, you won't. You'll have the same situation occur where the person misunderstood. They thought they thought they agreed to something and you get something else. So that's not useful. And
just to clarify a little bit on the front end, when people aren't doing what they should be doing, or they're not doing their part of the work, that may be because of expectations on both sides, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's a good point, Phil. Actually, yeah. So that could be an indicator that, okay, clearly we have a misalignment here, that I expected them to take care of this part. They haven't done it. So what's that about? And that's where you want to get some transparency. You want to get it on the table so you can work with it. So you ask, hey, I understood this to be your part of this project.
Right.
Maybe I misunderstood. Is that what you understand your role to be? And then the person could say, well, no, I actually thought Joe was doing it.
Yeah.
I'm not planning on doing it. Oh, okay. So now you see that, okay, there was just a misunderstanding of who's doing what. And I do a lot of work with clients when we talk about inspiring and influencing others that are on a team towards a common goal or objective, right? One of the key elements of that is, having a clear vision and then assigning roles of who's going to do what, and getting agreement that everyone that's getting that role agrees it makes sense that it's them doing that role and not somebody else. So that you can take care of some of that on the front end, so you avoid some of those expectations later, those false understandings, right? So yeah, expectations pop up all the time. They're integrally involved in our society, in our business, and you hear it in words like performance reviews. And I was part of companies for years, and in our annual performance reviews, we had meet expectations, exceeds expectations, does not meet expectations as the criteria. So people are getting measured based on what the expectations are. And a lot of those times, those expectations aren't very clear.
It could be the last guy that had your position did that, so I expected you to do it.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point, that each job gets taken over by a unique individual the next time. And so it could be that your predecessor did all of these activities for that role. Mm-hmm. And you interviewed, and there was a job description. That's another place where, there's a certain written job description for this particular role that you're agreeing to take.
Yeah, a list of expectations.
Mm-hmm. It is a list of expectations. Exactly. And you get into the company and you start to see that the job is a real life situation where the job description is kind of outdated, or just isn't relevant anymore, because the business needs have changed since it was first created 10 years ago. Because people don't update them as often as maybe they could, because it's, again, an additional step in the process that not a lot of people want to take time for. Mm-hmm. So if you could see that taking time, slowing down to update job descriptions to really make them relevant for the business model at hand, the current one, then you may avoid a lot of expectations going on, situations like that. The key is that each individual in a company take ownership and responsibility for getting clarity on their role and make sure that what you're understanding your role to be, you put it on the table. And you say, okay, my understanding is I will take the lead on this. And I understand, Sue, you will take the lead on that.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you understand? So it's just a very simple discussion in the beginning of project kickoffs, in the beginning of a new initiative being launched, in the beginning of a new business relationship. As you just started a company, you're starting to build your understanding of what this role is there to do, because how you see it may be different than how others see it. And again, like you said, Phil, it could be from what your predecessor did. And now you're having a new approach, a different idea of what you could do to make a difference.
Yeah. It seems simple, but at the same time, I think this is probably not happening in a lot of situations. And that's why you're hearing about it from your clients. It
is simple. It truly is. It always comes down to simply a misunderstanding between two people. And what you're saying and hinting to, I think, is, okay, it sounds simple, but in reality, there's all sorts of disengagement in the workplace, which comes from people not seeing how they're making a difference, how their role really matters.
Mm-hmm.
So the expectation part is truly, okay, I'm here to do a job, and I see what the job is all about. I see why it makes a difference. I see why it matters. And so I'm going to show up and give it my best. And I have clients constantly coming to me saying, okay, so, I'm very good at making clear agreements, co-created agreements with other functions, but not so good with my boss. Because, I don't want them to think I don't know what I'm doing. I don't want to ask for clarity all the time because I think I'm expected to know what I'm supposed to be doing here.
Mm-hmm.
So you start to kind of fall into a trap of not having transparency around your role. So you start to kind of assume you know what is to be done without asking for clarity. And that's not a bad thing. It just means that, okay, you could be going down a path. A couple weeks, couple months goes by, and all of a sudden you're understanding your role to be very different than what your boss thought you were doing. Because you're not talking to each other all day long every day.
Mm-hmm.
And many jobs are remote locations, so they don't even see their boss on a very consistent basis. So our work environment today is ripe for expectations going on.
Yeah.
It's really the global business, the multicultural differences that are out there. It's just, making assumptions that this person operates the same way I do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's almost never the case, because each individual is going to approach a job, a situation, a task, a project, their own unique way. So that's where, it's to watch for these expectations building. It's to watch for any assumption I'm making that somebody else should be doing something other than what they're doing. And the should is the key word there.
Yeah, maybe talk a little bit more about that. I like when we stumble across these, maybe it's not stumble because I think you use them in your coaching practice, but these linguistic red flags that come up, mm-hmm. If you're hearing the word should, either in the inner dialogue in your head or being thrown around the office, that's a red flag that there are expectations and assumptions out there.
You got it. Yeah. The should word is really, it's a perfect indicator that something is not operating the way you want it to operate. And it could be even to yourself. So I have a client that is in a situation where she has to give answers to any performance variation that's occurring compared to the forecast. And I used to have to do that when I was in the corporate arena too, always explain the variances to forecast. And this woman is relatively new to the company. She's in a high-level position. So the expectation is she brings with her years of experience and knowledge and expertise.
Mm-hmm.
So she then carries that expectation of herself also. Now she's in a new company with new players, new product, new industry. I mean, there's no way that she can know everything from the beginning, from the onset, to have answers to any question, deviation to a performance issue that the company may be experiencing in that particular quarter. So she's now beating herself up, like, well, maybe this isn't the right job, maybe I'm not really cut out for this, maybe I'm not good enough for this, maybe I'm not, experienced enough. And she's starting to go down a spiral that's not very useful. So now she's coming in each day tentative, worried that maybe she's not going to really get this, and so she's not engaging as effectively as she could. And she's not asking for help. She's not asking for clarity. She's not asking for transparency because she's fed herself a story that she should know this. She should have the answers. So all these shoulds started coming up as she's talking to me. And I'm listening to it because it's a word, like you said, the linguistics are very important. And it's a word that just like screams out at me whenever I hear it. Mm-hmm. And so and that's what I'm listening for as a coach. I'm listening for those exact type of things because that's the indicator of what's going on. Mm-hmm. So I don't have to know her business. I don't have to know her industry. I don't have to know anything about it. The only thing I know is that she's believing that she should be doing something different than what she's doing. And so what we do is we slow it down, say, okay, let's talk about what's going on there. Who says you should have all the answers? Mm-hmm. And she caught it. She's like, well, I guess it's just me. I think I should. Okay. Well, how realistic is that? You just started at this place. And you just told me that you're new to this industry. So how would that even be possible? And she started to relax a bit and see that, okay, yeah, I'm kind of putting a false expectation on myself. Mm-hmm. And then we started talking about, okay, so what kind of agreement do you want to create with yourself? That when you're caught off guard with a question that you don't have the answer to, what do you want to say? What can be your default response that gives you time to find the answer? Mm-hmm. So she started developing a way, well, I can do this and I can, say, hey, that's an interesting question. I don't have the answer right at my fingertips. I'm going to go talk to the expert that's close to that issue, and I will get back to you by Wednesday. And now you're creating a really short-term, quick agreement with this person who's asking the question.
Yeah.
In this case, shareholders or board members, and that may not satisfy them. They say, "No, you should have these answers. I want an answer now." Okay, given that I don't have it. What else is an option for us here? That I understand you want an answer. I personally don't have it. Let me take a minute to call my manager and see if they by chance have the answer. Mm-hmm. So there's different things you can do in that moment that can take care of the situation to relax it, to then have that person who's frustrated, clearly that the shareholder's frustrated that there's been a performance problem compared to what they expected, right?
Right.
So again, we have the expectation word, the E word.
Yeah.
So when you make a forecast and you put out projections of what your profitability is going to be or what your revenue is going to be, those are now market expectations. And, they vary inevitably because,
sure,
life gets in the way and factors change what's happening.
Yeah. So you had a client, she's being affected by the shareholder expectations and then expectations of herself. And that had her kind of slowly sliding down to level 1 sort of helpless kind of energy. Mm-hmm. And she's turning that around by, I guess you said, making an agreement with herself. That when she catches herself thinking that way, she's got a plan for what she's going to do, and that's create a very short-term agreement with the shareholders about how to get them the information that they need.
Exactly.
And I wonder, can you talk a little bit about short-term versus long-term, or how do these agreements work in that sense?
Yeah, it's a good question. So So the agreements are only needed when something is not working the way you'd like it to work. So it doesn't need to go on forever until the end of time. It goes until things work again as agreed upon or understood or communicated with each other, until they don't. So let's say you co-create an agreement with a colleague and it's a reporting situation where you're waiting on information from another department to finalize your report. It happens every month, and then your report goes to your boss, who then gives it to the CEO. Okay, so you have a chain, you have a process there. Well, the one department, let's say it's the manufacturing group, has not given you their numbers on time for the last 3 months. And so you're scrambling at the last minute, you're staying late, you're missing time at home, you're burnout at this point. And you're seeing it as this group always is late. So you have a complaint. So you convert that into an agreement with her, a clear request of what you want that group to do. What do you want to change? So you have to talk through that, and that's what we do in the coaching sessions. We really do some work on, all right, what specifically do you want to happen? Not just get me my numbers on time, because that's clear, but that's not what's happening. That something's getting in the way of that happening.
Sure.
And you're not finding out until it's too late. So you want to talk to the person and say, look, this just doesn't work for me anymore. This has been 3 months in a row where you've missed the deadline for submitting the numbers. What's going on? And get it on the table. Get it out there. Ask those open-ended, empowering questions to get it out there so you can start working with it together.
Mm-hmm.
And then you co-create an agreement of, okay, let's test it out for the next month and see how it goes, whatever you're going to do. They're going to do their best to get it to you. If they're running behind or not able to, they're going to give you enough warning so that plan B can start taking place, whatever that is.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say you do that for 2 months and it now works. There's a clear method for how you're communicating with each other. So you don't have to keep co-creating agreements with everything, with that particular person, because now you work more effectively with each other.
Yeah.
Right? So it could be just making a request. They say yes, they give you what you requested, move on.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't have to be a long, drawn-out, co-created agreement forever and ever and ever. It's basically to get things working again in a way that's mutually acceptable and beneficial and makes sense until it doesn't work again.
Mm-hmm.
And then you slow it down, make a clear request, and co-create a new agreement on whatever the issue is then. Because things are changing. Life is dynamic. So every day there's a new situation occurring.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of, it's really what they are. They're in the moment agreements that are taking care of a situation that's not working for now until it doesn't. And then it's going to be a new agreement that's modified to take care of whatever isn't working at that point.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
That does. You were saying earlier, in talking to your boss, you've had clients that express, some reluctance to keep asking for clarity. And you were pointing out that, well, after a couple months, you might have divergent kind of ideas of what your role is because you haven't communicated enough. I could also see kind of the flip side of that happening where if you are communicating, then an agreement can sort of evolve as roles evolve. Does that happen as well?
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it, for sure. So, as I said, a lot of job descriptions are outdated and not updated with the change of everybody that comes in and the change of the business. So, and that's not a bad thing. It's just what tends to happen. Mm-hmm. So yeah, you're right. So let's say the business needs have changed. The customer base has changed. So now the role that you were doing and doing well, now it's starting to shift a bit. It's starting to morph into something else with different types of responsibilities. Mm-hmm. And that's, again, not a bad thing. It keeps you, expanding your repertoire of skills and experience. And so it's all good when it does that kind of shift. And so then it's a matter of communicating, again, to just for clarity's sake, to relate to your boss, hey, I just wanted to have an update. Because typically bosses and direct reports have one-on-one meetings to keep each other updated on the progress of the job, of the business. Mm-hmm. So you could bring that into your next one-on-one. Hey, I've been thinking about how my job has shifted. And I want to talk about, how my understanding of what now my main roles and responsibilities are, the latest set of priorities are. And doing that proactively will benefit you tenfold, because you're now starting to get in front of any expectations that may start percolating. Mm-hmm. And it's really strong leadership at that point. You're taking ownership for your contribution to the company and the role you're filling. And you're deciding to create it the way that it makes sense to be right now, given the change in the business dynamics, given the change in the customer mix, whatever it is that's going on.
Mm-hmm. I think we're just about out of time for today. I have one more thing I would like you to talk about, and maybe I'll bring it up by doing this. How long ago did you first hear about this whole concept of expectations versus agreements?
Oh, it's a great question. I've been working with it for 4 years.
4 years.
4 years since I first heard it, and I listened to the audio from my coach, Steve Chandler, who's the one that developed the distinction. I listened to the audio probably a good 40 to 50 times. It's 25 minutes long, but over the course of that 4 years, I've listened to it 40 to 50 times. And every time I listen to it, I hear something different, because it applies to every situation in my life over and over and over. And I'm still working at it, right? It's not something that I've mastered yet. I still get expectations going. The good news is I notice it sooner, and then I cut it off at the pass before it can spiral out of control. So I see it, and I love how I'm able to see it sooner now. And I'm getting better at asking for what I want. I'm getting better at really, being more clear and specific. And, I get feedback from others, from my son and from people in my family and clients that I have, that, they appreciate how clear it is, that there's, you said that. All right, yeah, I can do that. Mm-hmm. Instead of the assumptions and the vague, kind of unspoken expectations that would build resentment and frustration. I lived that way for years and years and years. So I love this work. I love this distinction that Steve created. It's totally changed everything for me. So it is a practice, just like anything, and we've talked about that before, practice leading to mastery, which leads to more enjoyment and satisfaction in everything, in all of the relationships that I get to have.
Yep. I think that's a good conclusion for today's podcast. This whole matter of expectations versus agreements, learning, practicing how to co-create clear, strong agreements with the people in our lives, whether at home or at work. It's a powerful concept, but it does take learning and practice. And I hope all the listeners will benefit from it as you have, and as I have from talking with you about it. So thanks very much, Sherry.
Thank you, Phil.
And thank you also for listening. Be sure to subscribe to the Sherry Welsh Coaching Podcast. You can find it on iTunes, Google Play, YouTube, and other podcast directories as well. For Sherry Welsh today, this is Phil Johnson. Thanks again for listening.